Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content and $7 Productions. It is 1756, and 20-year-old Daniel Morgan is tied to a tree in the Virginia wilderness, surrounded by a wall of silent British redcoats. For the crime of knocking a British officer unconscious with one punch, Morgan has been sentenced to 500 lashes. This is not a punishment. It's a death sentence. 10, 11, 12. Most men pass out by the time the count hits 200. By 300, they're unconscious or dead. But Daniel Morgan is 6'2" of frontier-hearted muscle, and he isn't going anywhere. He stands with his forehead pressed against the bark, his knuckles white as he grips the trunk. He doesn't scream. He doesn't beg for mercy. Instead, he does something that terrifies the British officers watching his ordeal. He counts. 497, 498, 499. The drum stops. The soldiers untie his hands, expecting Morgan to collapse into a heap, but he remains on his feet. He wipes the sweat from his eyes, looks the commanding officer dead in the face, and manages a defiant, bloody grin. He later tells his friends that the drummer miscounted. The British only gave him 499 lashes. The British thought they were just breaking a common teamster. Instead, they were forging the ultimate rebel. They gave Daniel Morgan 499 reasons to hate the British crown. And he is about to spend the rest of his life collecting that debt, one redcoat at a time. Hello, and welcome back to Badass of the Week, the show where we tell the badass history of badasses. My name is Ben Thompson, and I'm joined today by a very special guest. He is a director, producer, and co-directed The American Revolution with Ken Burns and Sarah Botstein. I'm joined today by David Schmidt. David, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
It's great to be here, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and so you were a director on the American Revolution series with Ken Burns. I think Burns is probably somebody I don't need to introduce to the Badass of the Week audience, but I've seen much of American Revolution, and for me, it's up there with the Civil War. I think it's amazing and fantastic. Can you kind of introduce the project to people and tell them what you've been working on?
Sure. Well, I think probably like you, I grew up watching Ken's films.
Mm-hmm.
I watched the Civil War with my older brother, but also in school, both 8th grade, 11th grade, and in college. So I've just always been really attracted to that visual storytelling that Ken's so famous for. And I luckily fell into a job right after I graduated college, and I've been working with him ever since. So that's the 16 plus years now.
Wow.
But the American Revolution is a 12-hour, 6-part series on the war, the Revolutionary War, and the political context that birthed it and that came out of it. And it's been a long time coming. We've been working on it. We worked on it for almost 10 years. It's been 10 years right now since we started work on it. And, just every day was a constant, I don't know if you want to call it humiliation, but something where it was learning so much about what matters so much to our history that we didn't previously know.
And it's a really important topic because I feel like it's one that, doesn't really, what you guys did a really good job with in the show is kind of making these feel like real people rather than portraits or pictures on a nickel or something. We hear these stories growing up in school about the great heroes of the American Revolution, but they don't feel like real people. And I think you guys did a really good job of doing that with the show.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's so hard to really feel how flesh and bone they are. We don't have any photos of them. We obviously don't have any moving images of them or audio recordings of them, but they did leave behind an awful lot of text that gives you window into what they were thinking, what they remembered, what they experienced during the war. And we were lucky enough to have probably the best cast ever record their thoughts. So Josh Brolin as George Washington, for instance. Paul Giamatti returned as John Adams. Morgan Freeman's in there. Benedict Arnold, our friend, is played by Batman Michael Keaton. Lots and lots and lots of people lent their talent to this, and we're really grateful for it. This is a time, where the only thing we have to look at a lot of these people is oil paintings, which are frozen in time and are only people who had their portraits painted were people who had the money to pay for it and the time to spend to sit in a chair while somebody painted their image. And that's a really small set of the American population of, millions of people, probably about 3 million by the end of the war. So it was a challenge, but we're really grateful that I think we did as good a job as we could have to bring these people back to life. They were living people, and what they lived through is extraordinary. And I hope that people who watch that see that.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because you worked with Ken Burns on the Vietnam War series. And for that, you received Jane Mercer Footage Researcher of the Year. And, that the Vietnam War is amazing, but you were able to pull a lot of televised, like very gritty, very visceral film footage. And with this, there's no footage, there's no film. What were some of the challenges you came across trying to translate that into the American Revolution?
I mean, I think we could probably still be in the archives researching for Vietnam right now. There's so much out there. And it is really gruesome. I like to joke that Benjamin Franklin, because he got involved in politics and war, wasn't able to invent the moving picture camera. That's unfortunate for us as filmmakers. But on the other hand, we've seen a lot of war, working on the Vietnam War, Ken and Sarah working on film on World War II, Ken working on the Civil War, and we know what it's like.
Right.
And it turns out you don't need to see it when you hear somebody say, when you hear in episode 4 of our film, somebody saying that they saw, or somebody saying that there was an amputation where they're taking off one leg and a cannonball comes and takes off the other leg in the middle of the operation.
Oh my God.
You don't need to see that. You can understand that this is really tough,
right?
Really violent, really brutal war. And people are not just dying from the violence, they're dying from awful diseases at the same time. I think one thing that we, like the American Revolution is something that we all have a feeling for before we have any memories. It's the 4th of July, it's the flag. It's, if you ever look at paper currency, it's on there. And it's a part of us, but we tend to think of it pretty sanitized way. We think about the documents, we think about the men in the wigs and the stockings, and buckles and all that. We don't think about the bayonets and the muskets and the death. And the reality is that a lot of people suffered during these 8 long years of war and the years of uncertainty before and after. And I think that understanding that makes all their sacrifices mean more and makes those foundational world-changing documents matter when you understand their context. You can understand why they needed that Bill of Rights and what it means when you understand what they went through to make it.
Right. And, you bring up a very good point, because when you think about the American Revolution and war, you do picture the stockings and the buckles and the powdered wigs and the portraits and all of this stuff. You almost hear the music in your head of, the fiddle music or whatever. And the guy that we're going to talk about today is not the kind of guy who got those portraits really painted for him. This is a guy who, like you kind of alluded to, like a lot of the killing in this war was done with a bayonet, face to face and hand to hand combat. And the guy that we're going to talk about today, he is, he's got this huge scar on half his face was shot off. He's got lashes. He's got scars from hundreds of lashes. He is kind of a rough, tough, scarred, wounded. He kind of represents the part of the story that you're talking about here, where, these are real people, and this was a very brutal and gruesome war. And Daniel Morgan kind of embodies the unpolished side of the American Revolution. He's kind of, we see the John Adams and the Thomas Jefferson portraits, but this guy was like in the trenches, literally like fighting with a sword, right?
Yeah. And with a rifle.
Yes, and with a rifle. So we're going to pause really quickly for an ad break. And when we get back, we're going to tell the story of Daniel Morgan. Welcome back to Badass of the Week. I am here with David Schmidt. He's a director on the American Revolution with Ken Burns and Sarah Botstein. So, David, we're going to start the story in roughly 1735. This is one of the things I love about this time period. We're like, it's kind of maybe sometime around 1735 Daniel Morgan was born. Yeah. We don't really know.
Do you know why they think he was born in 1735?
Why?
Because he was captured at the Battle of Quebec, which was on the last day of 1775. Mm-hmm. And sometime early, in his capture, which is 1776, he said, I'm 40 years old. So they're just like, well, he probably wasn't born in the first 3 days of January of 1736. So let's just say 1735. That's really likely.
Yeah, this is how
that's the best guess we have for him. This is a larger than life, really great hero of the American Revolution. Not even that long ago, and I just don't know this stuff.
Yeah, amazing. I just love it. Yeah, it's so funny because okay, good enough. This is how history is written, right? This is what we can say. Yep. So he's born in New Jersey. He's a big guy. He gets to be 6'2", which is huge for this time period. He's a fighter. He's rebellious. He's tough. There's a story where he gets into a fight with his father and leaves home, never goes back again. He ends up down in the Shenandoah Valley in a town called Winchester, which was known at the time as Battletown because there was fighting all over the place, all the tavern brawls. I picture a cowboy bar where you walk into the saloon and everybody's just beating each other up. So Daniel Morgan shows up here and he's kind of the king of this bar in this town.
It's basically the Wild West at the time.
Yeah. It was about as west as you could get in the colonies. And so he's down there. He's working some odd jobs. He works at a sawmill, works as a teamster, and just rough and tumble. This is not the high society stuff we were talking about before. This is a tough life, right? Mm-hmm. And so at 19, he starts to he gets a job that he'll be known for. He's called the Old Wagoner because he was a wagon driver, which doesn't say, it's like a teamster, basically a truck driver, which doesn't sound that dangerous, but is extremely dangerous in 1735 or 1756.
Yeah, very.
And so
the roads are not particularly well maintained, and there's a lot of space between towns.
Yes, and there's a lot of just like you said, Wild West. There's
not a lot of street lights.
Yes.
There's no AAA.
Yes, potholes. You can't believe. Yeah. And not to mention bandits and other people trying to kill you along the way and rob you.
For sure.
And so in 1756, the French and Indian, he becomes kind of wrapped up in the French and Indian War. England and France are fighting over the colonies, and Daniel Morgan is a wagoner, which is an important job. He gets kind of called into service. He gets hired by a British general to take part in Braddock's expedition against the French at Fort Duquesne. And Morgan is the kind of guy, Morgan's a big personality, a big guy. He's loud. He likes to fight. He doesn't like to take any guff from anybody. And at some point, he pisses off a British officer. And this is kind of a wild story.
Yeah.
So he angers this British lieutenant who hits him with the flat of his sword. And Daniel Morgan responds by slugging the dude unconscious with one punch. Which is not the chain of command, not how things work in the British Army.
Frontier justice, right?
Yep, frontier justice. I love it. And so he's arrested, and he's a colonial who just struck a British officer, and there are rules for these sorts of things. And the rule for this sort of thing is that he's basically going to get whipped until he dies, except he doesn't die.
What is it, 400, 500 times he's hit with the lash?
Yes. He's sentenced to 500 lashes, which just, every time I read that, I'm like, that has to be a typo, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't want to be hit 500 times with a pool noodle. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
So he's holding on to the post and they're whipping him with the whip. Apparently, like most men just fell unconscious or died, like literally just died on the spot after getting this type of punishment. But he survives. He stays conscious. He remains on his feet and he counts every lash. And there's a story that goes on that will follow him around for the rest of his days, where he says, "Oh, they only got me 499 times. They owe me one," which I just love. This kind of sums up Daniel Morgan and what the British are going to get. This is a guy who has 499 reasons to be angry at the British officers.
And remember that he got this whipping because he's going to hold on to that memory through the rest of the whole war.
He's going to hold a grudge against British officers for a long time. Oh, yeah. But he lives, and not only does he live, he's back in the war later on. In 1758, 2 years later, he's back in action. Pontiac's Rebellion is a segment of the French and Indian War. He's near Fort Edwards, where he's ambushed by Native Americans who are fighting on the side of the French. Morgan takes a musket ball that comes in the back of his neck and goes out his mouth. It exits his left cheek, takes out all of his teeth on that side, shatters his jaw, and leaves him with this crazy, I don't know, the Joker is the only kind of scar I can think of, you know? Like, there are portraits painted of him.
Maybe it's more Two-Face.
Could be, yeah, dang. Yeah, there are portraits of him, but they are only painted from the right side.
Yeah. Wow.
But he stayed on his horse. He got shot through the face, stayed on his horse, maintained consciousness, and outran the people who were chasing him and lives. Just this alone is badass, right? But we haven't even started the American Revolution. So he kind of goes back home. He's this veteran of the French and Indian War. He settles down. He meets a woman named Abigail, and they they settle down. They have 2 daughters. She teaches him to read and write. He stops fighting so much. He becomes a farmer. And he joins the local militia, which is, I mean, David, I guess you should probably explain what the militia is a big deal, especially with the frontier and with, when we talk about the American Revolution.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't really have, there was no standing army, and they didn't really have police force of any significance. So if there was trouble, they'd have to rally the townsfolk and go run out with their whatever firearms, or if not firearms, pitchforks, or whatever they had around, to try to defend what they had. So that's an important part of the American Revolution, but it pre-exists the American Revolution. Right,
because you're on the frontier. Yeah, you can't depend on the army or the police to show up. It's just a heavily armed neighborhood watch. When we talk about the minute,
yeah, basically, but better way to phrase it.
When you talk about the Minutemen, this is kind of what this is their deal. So he becomes a captain in the local militia. He and Abigail lived together for 10 years before they're actually married, which is kind of interesting. And they're married by a guy named Charles Min Thruston, who they call him the Fighting Parson because he later loses an arm fighting against the British in the Revolution. So he's there and he's kind of living his life on the frontier. It's hard, but it's going well. But then in 1775, the revolution begins. The Continental Congress calls for rifles. They call for help. Boston's under siege by the British, and Daniel Morgan organizes 96 Virginia riflemen from his militia, forms up a company, marches these guys 600 miles in 21 days from Virginia to Boston to help break the siege. And it's worth mentioning, and David, this is the thing that's going to come up too, is that like not a single member of that group fell out of line during the journey. All 96 of them showed up with him, and they were the first Southern troops to arrive at Boston.
Just imagine. I mean, driving 95 is hard enough.
Yeah, right.
These guys are the run it, basically. The Appalachian Trail. It's like somewhere between the Appalachian Trail and the interstate. They're doing this in, how fast did you say they did it?
21 days, 600 miles.
And they're coming from the valley, the Shenandoah Valley. They're not the people who, they have no trade with Boston, right? Mm-hmm. Boston's port is closed. And that's a big deal for New England. It's all they're fighting for is the precedent of don't tread on them because you're treading on me.
Right.
And they just go to work and they go. These are people who don't have the property to defend that somebody like George Washington does, but they're still going.
Right.
And I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. They're just there because Daniel Morgan hates the British. And so they get there and he's going to form up this group, and we kind of alluded to it a minute ago, but he forms up Morgan's Rangers. And these guys are a little different than your standard like frontline force. They, particularly in the armament that they carry, you mentioned the rifle before, but when Morgan and his guys show up, they're frontiermen, they're hunters, and they're carrying a weapon known as the Pennsylvania long rifle, which is, specialized, but is very, very effective, much more effective than at much longer ranges than the standard weaponry at the time.
Yeah, it takes longer to, reload, I think, and it's a little bit harder to service, but it's got a longer barrel. It's got a grooved barrel where a musket's got a smooth bore barrel, and it's much more accurate at distance for that reason. The British referred to, I think it's the British, somebody referred to either the rifles or the riflemen, I'm not even sure which, as the most fatal widow and orphan makers in America.
Yes.
I think it's probably the gun, but whatever. The man who wields the gun's doing it too.
Right. The guns don't kill people. People kill people.
They both do. Let's be honest.
they help. The gun helps. They have they're accurate at 250 yards, and the British are carrying these smoothbore muskets, the Brown Bess. It's accurate to 50 yards. So that's a huge range difference.
That's a huge range.
The Pennsylvania long rifle, like you said, it takes longer to load. It's more specialized. It's harder to work with, harder to service, more expensive. Takes longer to load. You can get one shot a minute, whereas some of these other ones you can get 3-4, and it can't take a bayonet, which is another thing that you needed for the. But
and they knew how to use them because they used them on the frontier, and they used them for hunting, and they used them for all this other stuff, which people on the East Coast didn't have any use for.
Right.
So they were specialized. They were total special forces almost, because they not only did they have these rifles, but they knew how to do backwoods warfare.
Right. And these are basically sniper rifles, and they have the same advantages and drawbacks of, it's why we don't give sniper rifles to all of our soldiers, right? But like you said, they are special forces, and Morgan's Rangers kind of end up being, to this day, the 75th Ranger Regiment traces their lineage back to these guys.
Wow.
And they were experts, and, Daniel Morgan gave them the orders to find anybody with a uniform, anybody who looks like they were giving orders, and shoot that guy first. Take out the leadership, take out the officers, and the British hate this because
they sure do.
This is ungentlemanly.
The writer Rick Atkinson says in their film that during the Battle of Bunker Hill, which Morgan wasn't there for, but during the Battle of Bunker Hill, the Americans were picking off the officers because the British officers, their coats had a richer dye because they could afford the more expensive dyes than the enlisted men. It's just like, oh man, how are you? Why do you want to stand out so bad just for high society, and it's going to be the death of you?
Yeah. There's a story from World War I where the French officers would wear white gloves because French officers have always worn white gloves. And then they would just get picked off by the Germans. And then eventually they were like, please stop wearing white gloves. And all the officers were like, no, French officers wear white gloves. We're going to wear our white gloves. And they're like, stop doing that.
I'm glad I wasn't in World War I.
No, you don't want to be in never war. You never want to go back in time in any period of history.
No.
Modern day has its problems where you would never want to go back in time.
Yeah, no, you would not.
Okay, speaking of which, in 1775, they marched to Quebec. So the Continentals, they think that they can get Canada to join them in the revolution. They're going to go in and conquer Canada. It's one of multiple attempts the United States has made to conquer Canada, all of which have failed. But they call it the March of Death, and it's a 45-day march through swamps and frozen bogs in Canada in the winter, like December, January. Like you said, they're attacking on New Year's Eve.
It's late November into December.
And
it's nuts.
Yeah.
And they're led by
our friend of the show, Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold. We did a Badass of the Week on Benedict Arnold. And, he is like, it's so wild. If he hadn't turned, if he hadn't betrayed America, he would be like one of the greatest heroes in American history.
That was actually one of the challenges of this film, was finding a portrait of Benedict Arnold, because for obvious reasons, American portrait artists didn't have access to him after the war, and probably just weren't that interested in repeating his image anyway.
Yeah, he basically
ultimately found a couple that exist in England that really haven't seen the light of day in 200 plus years.
Oh, wow.
To use for the film. But yeah, he was pretty well heralded until he wasn't.
Yeah, he's basically damnatio memoria in the U.S. now. Like, I think there's like 2 monuments to him, but they don't. None of them.
There's one monument to his leg at Saratoga, just to his leg.
But it doesn't mention his name. That. None of them mention him by name. West Point has all of the generals from the American Revolution on the wall there, and they just have his birthday and death date. No name, no picture. It's the only one that has nothing.
In West Point, when they serve what you and I would call Eggs Benedict, they call it Eggs MacArthur. Eggs MacArthur.
Amazing.
I believe.
Amazing.
Yeah. Hey, they can hold a grudge, and they should.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, yeah, he deserves it, but yeah, he was badass right up until then.
He was.
But Daniel Morgan was too, because he's up there and he's rallying these guys, right? None of those 96 fell out for him. These guys are marching. A lot of these are militia soldiers. Like you said, they're not fighting for even their own hometowns. They're from all over the colonies, and they're marching through frozen swamps in the middle of nowhere, Canada. They're out of food. They're eating their boots. They're eating their cartridge pouches. They're eating anything they can get their hands on.
They're eating their dogs.
Yeah, their dogs. And there's one story where Morgan, there's some boats that crash in the Dead River, and he's in this like frozen river trying to pull like ammo and gunpowder and rifles out of the water before it all sinks. And it's just like, and this guy's like, he's an officer, right? And, you know, he's got the scar through his face. He's got the scars on his back from being whipped by the British. He's out there in like, you know, waist deep frozen ice water, negative 20 degrees, trying to save the gunpowder so he can keep fighting.
He's 40
years old. Yeah.
Not a spring chicken anymore, and definitely not back then.
Yeah. I'm 40, and sometimes I sleep weird and I walk funny for like 3 days.
Yeah. I'm 39 and I feel the same. I had a sneeze earlier in this podcast. It almost made me quit.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm with you. So, you know, they go to attack Quebec City, which is a walled city in a blizzard on New Year's Eve in negative 20 degree weather. And the Quebecois, they don't want us there. They're fighting as hard as they can, right? Not just the British garrison, but like the citizens there, like the people of this city. The Canadians don't want to be Americans, so they're throwing like pots and pans out the windows at the soldiers and stuff.
Their militias rise, to the occasion.
Yeah, the Canadian militia comes from all over the place to fight. Benedict Arnold is wounded in the charge and is dragged away kicking and screaming. And Daniel Morgan is not the most senior officer in the colonial army at this time, but everybody kind of looks to him and they're like, all right, Dan, what are we doing? And he's just like, follow me, pulls his sword and charges the walls. He's the first guy over the wall. As he pops his head over, he gets blasted with grape shot, falls down, gets back up and goes back over the wall and leads his guys into the city. He's
larger than life, that guy.
Yeah. I mean, that's like the third time he's been hit in the face now in this story. Right. And yeah, he keeps going, blows his hat off. They're fighting through the city, and eventually, the Quebecois are building these like barricades all over the place. And eventually he's cornered. Him and his last group of his guys, they're cornered. They're surrounded. The Brits are pointing, Canadians, everybody's pointing rifles at him. He's got his sword out and he's got to surrender. As you said, he's captured. But he says that he refuses to give his blade to a scoundrel Brit. So he finds some priest in the crowd and he starts shouting like, I give my sword to you and the devil can have the rest of you.
Oh man.
just so I'm not going to give the British officers even like the satisfaction.
Yeah, he found like a French. Is it like a French priest?
It was a French priest. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
I'll surrender to you. The rest of these guys can go to hell.
Yeah.
And so he's a prisoner of war for a year in Canada. And I read the story in one spot that I couldn't really verify anywhere else, but they said that like he was so impressive in his like resilience while he was a prisoner that the British offered to make him a colonel in the British Army. And he was like, don't ever insult me again. I'm your enemy. Okay, so he gets out and he arrives back. He gets back to U.S. lines and he's there for the Battle of Saratoga. And this is the big one, right? The Saratoga is a big turning point of the war. So, and Daniel Morgan's kind of front and center for it.
Sure is. So
the British are coming down from Canada with a huge army, and they're going to try to cut off the colonies. And Benedict Arnold, our friend Benedict Arnold, is there trying to prevent this huge caravan. The caravan's getting bogged down. Same problems the Americans had going up, the British are having going down. And my father was a big fan of Johnny Burgoyne. He was like, he's like, he wasn't a good general, but if you were going to have your theoretical historical dinner party, you'd want him there because he was a party. The guy he slowed down the entire expedition because he needed to bring all of his party supplies with him.
Right.
But so they are, but Daniel Morgan is kind of on the front here to stop the attack. He puts his snipers up in the trees. They hide at this place called Fraser's Farm. He's in the vanguard. And I love this detail. He was signaling his men by using a turkey call to signal his guys. Just very frontier.
It's how American can you get?
Right. Yeah. Hiding in the trees. I'm picturing the camo face paint like the Navy SEALs.
Right. We're north of Albany, which was the British target, and south of the village of Saratoga, which is about where Burgoyne's army crossed the Hudson River. But the Polish engineer Tadeusz Kosciuszko has picked this area, Bemis Heights and Fraser, Freeman's Farm?
Yeah, Freeman's Farm.
In part because there's a bend in the river there and they can command any southerly approach by any of the roads. And Burgoyne just has no idea what's in front of him.
Yeah.
And that's why you can hide people in trees, and that's why you can get away communicating with turkey calls. And it's not fun for Mr. Party, John Burgoyne.
No, it's not fun for Johnny Burgoyne or especially for Simon Fraser, because the British general gets sniped from 300 yards out by.
I think that might be in the second battle, but yeah.
Yes. So there's there's repeated fighting, and Morgan and his guys, they're taking out officers at long range. The British hate this, right? Because the Americans are just hiding in trees behind bushes, and the British are out there in formation in their red uniforms. And it just, war is changing. The face of war is changing. Yeah. And this, Saratoga ends up being a disaster for the British. Benedict Arnold does more heroics. You can listen to that episode if you want more about that. But the British are defeated. And not only does this turn back a huge portion of the British army, but it, has the more important component of getting France involved in the war, which is something that you guys talk about on your show. But I feel like kind of gets glossed over a lot when you talk about American history, talking about the French.
Which just completely changes the calculus for the British more than anything, right? They have to pay attention to so much more on the imperial chessboard than they had to before.
Right.
They will never send another army into the interior. Well, they'll send it into the southern interior. I'll take that back. They're not going to be able to try to run another invasion from Canada again.
No.
They're going to have to withdraw from Philadelphia. They're going to have to send troops to the Caribbean. So that all really matters. And then, of course, the French are instrumental in the Yorktown campaign that wins the war.
Right.
So even before the French kind of come to North America, just them being against the British really matters.
Yes.
But then when they come to North America, they are vital to the success of the decisive campaign.
Right. When you talk about France getting involved, like you said, they show up at Yorktown. They actually win this huge naval battle off the coast of Yorktown that doesn't get talked about very much. But you're like, oh, okay, they show up at Yorktown and that's the last battle. It's like, well, sort of, except that after
even at Saratoga, the Continental Army is armed with French weaponry and clothing.
Yeah, the French are sending all kinds of gear. And when the French join after Saratoga, like, oh, maybe you guys can win this. We'll help you. We'll join the war. They immediately attack England in India and Gibraltar and the Caribbean and Canada. They attack them everywhere, all across.
And they send a fleet to North America. It just isn't successful for a little while.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a big battle. This is game-changing for the American Revolution. But Morgan's biggest battle is still to come. And so I want to take a really quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about his biggest victory. All right, welcome back. I'm here with David Schmidt. And David, we are going to jump ahead a few years and we're going to talk about Morgan's big victory at the Battle of Cowpens. And his enemy here is another guy. We did our July 4th episode this year. We talked about Butcher Tarleton, Bannister Tarleton, the most hated British officer in the colonies. He's kind of the anti-Morgan. He's like a big showy, like, he wears the big hats, wears the fancy clothes. He definitely had like a redder uniform than everybody else. You're talking about that.
Yeah, I think he's the son of the mayor of Liverpool or something like that.
Yes.
Whose family made their profits off of the slave trade, which a lot of people, I suppose, made their profits off of the slave trade, but you don't really imagine that in the British Army.
Right.
And that's the case with him.
He later, one of the stories, I do these talks, I have a book on the American Revolution that I do for like a middle school, high school age audience. And I go to the schools and I talk about him. And then they're like, well, what happened? Who got him? Right? Because he was the bad guy in the He's based on the bad guy in the Patriots. Like, who got him? Nobody got him. He goes home, marries a movie star, becomes super successful, becomes a member of parliament who argues for the slave trade, as you'd have it. Yeah. And but he's very showy. He's very flashy. He has many, many, many portraits painted of him from both sides. Fancy, handsome, preening, and he has been kind of kicking ass down here in the South. So Cowpens is in the South. The Northern, like you said, they're not going to send any more big invasions to the North, but they do send troops down to the South. And Tarleton's down there and he's winning and he's beating big name people. He's beating the best generals that we have. So the Americans send Daniel Morgan down there to deal with this guy. And I can just imagine Daniel Morgan like just groaning, like, okay, here we go.
Well, he had quit for a while. And after the Daniel Morgan, just because his health is bad, he's given a lot to this war. His back is just, the back that has borne 499 lashes is also given out to sciatica because of the march through Maine and Quebec. And, this war is going on a long time. He's going to take a little break. And then the British just kick ass in the South. They take Charleston. Cornwallis is leading the war effort in the South, defeats General Gates at Camden. Tarleton is successful at Waxhaws and elsewhere. And so Washington and the Congress send Nathaniel Greene south, and he picks up along the way his buddy Daniel Morgan, and he sends Morgan into the South Carolina backcountry to deal with the British presence there. And that's when Cornwallis says, okay, Tarleton, go get him.
Right. And Morgan's tough, but Morgan knows this guy, right? Knows what he's doing. And he sets up a pretty impressive strategy for dealing with Tarleton, kind of using his own aggressiveness against him. Yeah. So his plan is, he's a militia guy, right? He grew up in the militia. He came up in the militia. He understands the militia. And the militia, especially at this time in the war in this part of the country, is not performing very well. Tarleton charges them with cavalry. And these are, the militia gets kind of a bad rap because these are guys who they're farmers who are kind of defending their homeland. They're neighborhood watch. They're regular people. They're not trained soldiers. They don't have, the equipment, the organization, the training, the experience. Some of these guys don't have uniforms.
The promise of pay.
Right. Yeah. They might not get paid.
But the promise of pay.
Yes. They are not getting paid for this. They're barely getting fed. And now they've got to stand down a cavalry charge by trained British cavalry, some of the best cavalry in the world, without a bayonet. It's not a good deal for these guys. So it's understandable they haven't performed very well. But Tarleton's the kind of guy who's like, is this militia? I got him. And so what Morgan does is he raises his militia in the front. He puts those in the front lines. And he goes to these guys. He goes to every single one of them, goes up and down the campfires the night before the battle. It's cold, right? It's cold. There's frost. There's campfires.
January.
It's January. And he, like you said, he has sciatica. He's got screaming nerve pain. He's in insane pain all the time, probably in his face as well, everywhere. And he goes up and down the line and he's like, I need you to give me 2 shots. You give me 2 shots. Then you can run for your life. And when you get home, all the old men will tell you that you're a hero and all the girls will kiss you. But just do this for me. Give me 2 shots before you run away. And Tarleton arrives. He sees this militia in the front. They fire 2 volleys. He charges. They break and run in disarray. He charges directly into this trap where the entire regular Continental Army is there, more trained soldiers. He kind of runs in, charges directly into a double envelopment. It's like, can I? And he's crushed. Yeah.
So the first 2 lines of militia retreat behind the 3rd line of Continentals who Tarleton doesn't see it until it's too late. And then the militia come back around, right? And the cavalry on the other side.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's how they envelop them. The two pincers.
Yes, he had him in the trenches. He had him hiding, laying down so they couldn't see him. They stand up and he's like, oh, crap, I'm surrounded.
And just completely took advantage of this guy's hubris.
Yes. And then to like top it off, because, you know, Tarleton is a very boastful guy. His letters are amazing because he's just so over the top. Like
he writes in the third person.
Yes. It's amazing, right?
Yeah, his autobiography is in the third person. It's
so good. It's so funny. I love it. I think he's awesome. But he's badass in a completely different way than Daniel Morgan. Because Daniel Morgan's the opposite. He writes a letter to Nathaniel Greene, who has pulled Morgan out of retirement to win this battle. And Morgan demolishes Tarleton, and his letter is just basically one line. And it just says, "I've given them a devil of a whipping."
There you
Period.
go. There's the 500. There's the 500th lash, right? He wanted to whip him back.
Yep.
Pretty awesome.
And he serves out through the end of the war. And like you said, at Yorktown, the British surrender. The war ends. Everybody is invited to a big party except for Tarleton. He is not invited to the big end of the war party because everybody.
Well, he's at the surrender, believe it or not, but he's turning in his sword.
Yes, but they had a big party after. And they didn't invite him. Cornwallis and Washington had a dinner after, and he was not
hilarious.
Invited. Cornwallis and Washington and the French commander, but he's still, so he goes back home, settles down in Battletown in Winchester. He hires Hessian prisoners of war to be indentured, gets them out of prison, but they'll be indentured servants to him to help him build this big house. He names it Saratoga after his big battle. Gets a bunch of land, builds a farm. He's called out of retirement one more time. 12 years after the end of the war, he's called out of retirement in 1794 for the Whiskey Rebellion. So some farmers in Pennsylvania rebel against the new government. There's a whiskey tax, and they take up arms against the government. George Washington personally leads the army out to go deal with them, which is, I think, the only time in history that a sitting U.S. president has led an army in the field. But he calls Daniel Morgan out of retirement to make him a major general and to command one wing of the army. And I think this was more of a show of force than anything else, because what happens is these farmers are lined up and then they hear Washington's leading the army and Dan Morgan is leading the left flank. And they're like, no, we surrender. We're done.
Yeah. And I think it's a show of force, but I also think it's look, if Daniel Morgan, the crustiest of all frontiersmen, is standing on the other side, rethink this.
Yes. Yeah. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe this is not such.
Yeah. I don't know if they're wrong or right, but it wouldn't have helped to see him on the other side. You're totally right about that. Fair
enough. And he does serve a term in the House of Representatives as a Whig. Kind of let's all be, his kind of thing was let's be united as Americans. And one of the interesting things that comes from that is he dies in 1802, July 6, 1802, on his 66th birthday. And one of his last words was, "Old Morgan was never beaten," which I like.
That's nice.
His sword is still around. You can go see it. It's engraved. It says, "Draw me not without reason, sheathe me not without honor," which I thought was cool. But one thing that I thought was really interesting about him was that during the Civil War, Winchester was kind of a battleground, was going back and forth between both sides, but he was one of the only generals of the American Revolution that his burial site was visited by soldiers from both sides, North and South.
That's great.
Wanted to go pay respects to him because not a lot of American Revolution heroes got that treatment during the Civil War.
At George Washington's Mount Vernon, they make a big deal, rightly, about how it was considered neutral ground and neither side was going to touch it. It was not going to be used as a hospital. It was just going to be completely neutral. I love that.
Yeah.
You can't have that in Winchester, which was a battleground, and back and forth. It changed sides more than probably anywhere during the Civil War.
For sure.
In the Valley. And yet they didn't, they saw some hallowed ground there at his burial site, which I think that's really cool.
Absolutely. And so that's Daniel Morgan. He was a guy who fought like a man who had 499 reasons to hate the king and a long rifle to express it.
Yeah.
He took the British Manual of Style. He set it on fire, used the smoke to cover his flank, hid in a tree, sniped the officers.
He's obviously a big inspiration for Mel Gibson's character in The Patriot, but I mean, I think the real guy's much better badass.
Yes.
I'd like to see that movie.
Absolutely.
I mean, Mel Gibson didn't walk through Maine to Canada.
Right. Just crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff here.
Yeah.
So, David, what's the lesson? What's the lesson that we can take from the story of Daniel Morgan? You know, when we look at him compared to some of the more sanitized stories we see from the American Revolution.
I think he's a really great expression of the everyman that it took to win the war. He's obviously an extraordinary man, but he's at the head of hundreds and then thousands of people who just picked up their rifle and went to work.
Mm-hmm.
And he himself, you know, we don't even know what beginnings he rose from, right?
Right.
So I think that there's a lot of value in his story, and it's not just his military service. I know he only served one term in the House of Representatives, but you know, he's elected by his neighbors, and
Mm-hmm.
he's elected by his neighbors to be head of the militia. And there's just something so lowercase d democratic American about his story, and obviously quite resilient.
Right. He's chosen a lead. They follow him in combat when, like, you know, they stick with him on all those big long marches. When Benedict Arnold goes down, they look to him and not the superior officers who were there.
Right.
He's this leader. He's this charismatic leader, but he's not what you would kind of picture for your charismatic leader. He would be like the tough guy in the movie, not the guy leading, but he does. He leads from the front. He leads, you know, he's I don't know, kind of I picture like a very respected sergeant, you know?
Yeah. But then by the end, at the Whiskey Rebellion, he's a major general. I mean, it's not possible to rise from what he rose from to become a general in Europe.
Right.
There's a really good, you know, next week we'll talk about a badass called Johann Ewald. No, we won't, but we could. Who was a one-eyed German Jaeger captain, a Hessian in the war. And he's everywhere. I mean, he's at Germantown and Brandywine and in Charleston. He's Camden, I think. He definitely surrenders at Yorktown, and he's just a really great writer. You haven't gotten to the end of the series yet, but he's got the last line of the Yorktown campaign.
Oh, cool.
About just how impressed he is with these people. But when he went home to Germany, first of all, the Hessian soldiers who had fought in America were just known as the Americans when they went home, which I find funny.
Yeah.
And because he wasn't, you know, noble, born to the nobility, to the manor born, whatever you want to say, he was just passed over for promotion, even though he'd spent 8 years, distinguished years, or seven and a half, whatever many years in North America, frontline combat for his prince. He never got this promotion that he thought he deserved, so he just left. Now, I think there's reason to believe he saw in the model of the United States, like, these guys get promoted because they're good. I should too. And I think that's, you know, there's something to that. He ended up serving the King of Denmark, was promoted to general there, and was buried in a grave in Kiel, which is at the time was part of Denmark, later part of Germany. And so you said Daniel Morgan's grave was not desecrated during the Civil War. During World War II, Johann Ewald's grave was destroyed by Allied American and British bombing.
Oh, man.
So here's this guy who was an ally of the British to fight the Americans ever existing, and his grave was destroyed. You know, obviously it wasn't targeted, but there's just a lot of rich ironies in history.
Oh,
but the fact that somebody like Daniel Morgan could rise from a wagoner, and rise even to that position, from a brawler to become a major general and a member of the House of Representatives, is a truly American story.
Right. And even his combat style, everything kind of grittiness. He kind of embodies the American spirit fighting against the British in the Revolution, which is super cool.
Yeah. I think people think about people hiding behind walls and trees and shooting, and that's actually not that common in the American Revolution, but it is in the story of Morgan's riflemen.
Right, because the guns just weren't accurate enough. You had to get close. You had to get close and fire 1 to 2 volleys and then charge bayonets, and that's how the war was fought, right? So we have a couple more minutes here. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the process of working on the American Revolution, because you said it's been going on for a long time, and you've clearly put tons and tons of research into it. So can you talk a little bit about kind of what your process was for attacking this thing? Because it's a big topic. I kind of had to deal with it with the American Revolution book that I did, where I was just like, where do you even start, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I started working with this company after they'd had a lot of success. So I can trust the process in a way that, I mean, they can trust the process too, but I just like know that it's going to be good because the people I work with are good. But I also know, and I'm grateful for this, that we knew we had a lot of time to work on this. And so that just allows you to not feel too super rushed, to really read everything you can, to not leave any stone unturned, and to just keep going. So at the start, you just read everything you can. You listen to the Revolutions podcast. You listen to books on tape. You go to archives. When you see something in one of those books that you like, you check the footnote. You might see a quote that's 7 words long and then this one paragraph on page 316. You go to the footnote and you find out it's a whole diary. So you read the whole diary. And you pull from that diary these quotes that you get people like, Laura Linney and Meryl Streep and Jonathan Groff and Joel Kinnaman to read.
That's amazing.
So there's lots of that, and at the same time that we're beginning to pull these like threads to have these individual stories of people that will hopefully populate at least multiple of the 6 episodes. You're talking to the people who write these books or who teach American history or, who teach the American Revolution. Then you talk to the people that they tell you to talk to, and you end up interviewing some of them. While that's happening, Jeffrey C. Ward, who's been Ken's chief scriptwriter for a long time, he wrote The So War, The Revolution, jazz, baseball, Vietnam War. He is trying to wrestle to ground the, skeleton of the series. We decided people back then would debate what the revolution actually is, and certainly people now do too. Nobody can quite agree on when it begins, when it ends, what it is. John Adams will tell you. John Adams will probably disagree with himself, by the way, at different points. But at least at 1 or 2 points, he said the revolution was over before the war began. I don't agree with him, but you could see an argument for that. The revolution is the change in the minds of the people. And he thinks that happened before the revolution. I think a lot of the change happened because of the war. But regardless, we could have chosen something other than what we did. What we chose to do was to center it around the war. And, the first hour and a half are like leading up to the Battle of Lexington and Concord. And the last 45 minutes or so, probably 45 minutes are the aftermath between Yorktown and, the Bill of Rights. Sure. There's arguments to do different than what we did, but that was something wrestling to ground what those goalposts would be was actually a big thing to do. Took a long time to figure out. And Jeff's also really good at finding endings and beginnings to episodes. So each of the episodes is its own self-contained story. But you can't just arbitrarily cut 12 hours, 2 hours each, right? It's like, it has to be a button.
Right. And it leaves you wanting more. So when you get to the end, they do kind of have these, not cliffhangers, but like they do want you when it ends, you want to see what happens next.
Yeah. And it's not like designed, like we're not trying to make TV's 24, great show, no shade, but we're not, it's not like it's not like you have to watch the next thing to make it work. It should be self-contained, but on the other hand, it's like, I don't know, like the first episode ends right after Lexington and Concord. That felt like a natural place to go, but it also works with the cadence of the 12 hours. So we're doing all that, and then we're gathering at every image you can possibly imagine, both from the time. So that includes manuscripts, printings, paintings, etchings, manuscript maps, printed maps, drawings, what have you. And when we can, and it works, we're we're almost, if we can, we're going back to that, something that was there at the time. But that isn't always the case, that there is something from the time. So we felt comfortable going and seeing how every generation of Americans since the Revolution has depicted that war. So we're using like Alonzo Chapel paintings, Howard Pyle paintings, cool. Jenny Augusta Brownscomb's paintings, many other people, Frederick Coffey Jan, et cetera, et cetera. And then, a little bit along the way, we encountered these watercolor paintings done by people who are alive today, who made some stuff for the Museum of the American Revolution and other institutions. They're really great. Jeff Ward, when he first saw them, he just said, they're not trying to trick you, which I think is perfectly said. You can tell that those were not created in the 18th century, but so it doesn't look like we're trying to make you think that. But right. They are telling you, they're giving you something to imagine when you're thinking about the 18th century. So we licensed a lot of those. And then we realized, look, there's still some stuff that's outstanding that we don't have coverage for. For instance, when Washington inoculates the troops, or when the Stockbridge militia comes and joins the American army assembling outside of Boston. So we commissioned them to do, I think, 12 more watercolors. Oh, cool. So those range from those things that I just told you to building defenses in New York City before the British invasion, building up the statue that we've seen, other artists have depicted being torn down, a statue of George III in New York City that was torn down right after the Declaration of Independence was read there, by the way. And this is one of those things we couldn't get into the film, which there's so much of this too, but they melted down that statue. That's in. And they created a bunch of bullets from them. That's in. But this one guy said, if something to the effect of, pretty soon His Majesty's soldiers will be subject to being hit by melted majesty. I just love that. So there's just all of that. And then we also record new music or license some existing music, but mostly I would say new music. And the biggest line item, the two biggest line items in our budget were recreating a faithful map of 18th century North America, which is incredibly detailed, as accurate as you can imagine, with, settlements from Boston to Winchester to settlements, Indian settlements out in the Ohio River Valley, French settlements along the St. Lawrence River. We were able to place, and you'll actually see this on existing archival maps, which you'll also see in the film, but they would place the native nations roughly where they were on those maps. And we were able to verify those and slightly move them, if that made sense, to where they actually were. And we just had to pick a date too, because everything's moving, everything's in flux. So we're just like, okay, 1775, let's say, where were people then? So that was a huge undertaking. And then the other one was to send cameras into the field, and we filmed at all these historic sites. We also filmed at Fort Ticonderoga, at Colonial Williamsburg, Mount Vernon, Monticello, pretty much anywhere you can name that was from the 18th century and still is around today. And what you come away with is, I've moved from the East Coast during the production of this film, and I love that we have this to offer, just like a kind of a love letter to the beauty of the landscape of the East Coast, which doesn't get its shine in the way that we think about, mesas and the Southwestern desert and the redwoods and all that stuff. Like the East Coast, sure, we've talked about 95 already today. It is a lot of concrete and asphalt and steel and all of that. But there are really tremendously beautiful landscapes, and certainly there were then. And we wanted to get those on camera.
Yeah, and I think you guys did a really good job of it. I mean, I've seen the watercolors you're talking about, and they came out amazingly. And I think the show does a really good job of really kind of capturing the feel and kind of making you feel like you were there, and doing a very faithful job. I mean, it's kind of what your productions are known for these days. But I think you guys really knocked it out of the park with the American Revolution.
Thanks. I just want to say one last thing about that, which is, look, every generation of Americans, and I mean generation meaning anybody alive right now, has their opportunity every 50 years to revisit this history and really think about it. And we're about to enter the 250th anniversary of the year 1776. Now, the war began a year before that, as we've talked about, but that's going to be the big year that people are going to really think about this. And we wanted to offer something that people could use as a resource to think about that. And I know that not just those reenactors I was talking about, but basically everybody we've encountered over the last 10 years to help us make this, from advisors to the people we interviewed to the people who know nothing about history, but just giving of their day to work on it, to the librarians, the archivists, what have you, experts in their field, otherwise, want to make sure, the musicians want to make sure that we get this right, or want to do as much as they can to help us get this right. And it's really a collaboration of that, like hundreds, maybe 1,000 people, to make this what it is. And I feel not only that, but I talked a little bit earlier about, the artists throughout the generations and picking up their work. Well, at some level, we're collaborating with the generations of history, and not just the historians that led their work to understanding this, and those are definitely there. The late Bernard Bailyn's featured in our film. His work has been incredibly influential, and he leaned on people before him, and they on people before them, and all that. All of their work's in there. But so is the founding generation itself. And I feel really tremendously rewarded to be able to bring to life, to consciousness, to whatever, to surface some of these voices that people maybe never would have seen otherwise, or at least won't see on the same scale. People like people understand the name of Joseph Plum Martin sometimes, if they really know the Revolutionary War. Pretty much anybody who would be doing this film would have told his story, and his story is incredible. So I'm glad that more people would see that. But then there's people that nobody would have seen at all, like Betsy Ambler, John Greenwood, maybe a little bit, but probably not to the level that he is. And then in the southeast, James Potter Collins, who was at Cowpens. Really interesting, fascinating story. So there's lots of people like that I'm just, I feel they don't know that they worked with me, but they did. And I'm really grateful for what they did for, history, and what they did for this country.
Absolutely. I feel like the show does a really good job of capturing not just the big names, but also some of the more unsung heroes, who do have amazing stories. So, David, where can people find the American Revolution?
You can find the American Revolution on pbs.org or on the PBS app. It will also be re-airing in January, I think weekly, but you can stream it in 4K on the PBS app. Starting January 9th. So it will be airing every Friday night in January, and it will be, check your local listings. I think PBS is trying to, but lots of different PBS stations are trying to get this front and center as much as they can, because I think a lot of people are recognizing that the story of the American Revolution really matters, and they're also recognizing that they don't know the story of the American Revolution.
I agree. It is really important, and it is a lot different than I think what people kind of suspect. There's a lot of heroism. There's a lot of crazy stories. There's a lot of heartbreak and brutality, and it's it is kind of the story that made our country, and it's good to be reminded of that every so often. And I think you guys are doing really important work. David Schmidt, where can people find you? Are you online at all?
Don't find me.
Good. Yeah, I'm the same. So I always have to ask, but okay. So American Revolution is on PBS starting Fridays in January. And David Schmidt, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me about the show and about Daniel Morgan. It's been great having you on.
Thank you, Ben. Bye-bye.
All right. And thanks to all of you out there for listening to us. We do this every week. So if this was interesting to you, please come back next week. We'll have a story from another crazy character from history. Until then, thanks so much and stay badass. Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content and $7 Productions. Executive producers are Dwayne Johnson, Danny Garcia, Andrew Jacobs, Hiram Garcia, Brian Gewirtz, Frankie Chaparino, and of course, me, Ben Thompson. Writing is by me and my semi-regular but always awesome co-host, Dr. Patricia Larish. Story editing by Ian Jacobs. Our mixing, music, and sound design is done by the incomparable Jude Brewer. Production support by Jean McGale-Waite. Badass of the Week is based on my website, badassoftheweek.com, where you can read all sorts of stories about other badasses. If you want to reach out with questions or ideas, you can email us at badasspodcast@badassoftheweek.com. If you like this podcast, please subscribe, follow, listen, tell your friends, and tell your enemies. And please leave us a review. If you want to support Badass of the Week, please check out our Patreon page. We'll be back next week with another one.